Round 2 of the Grenke Chess Classic in Baden Baden was very hard fought, perhaps with one exception. The game between Baramidze and Aronian was a fairly lifeless draw, but the other 3 games were really tough. Anand against Naidic was an endgame in which Anand had seemingly a almost decisive advantage, but Naidic defended so resourcefully and so accurately, and finally he made a draw. Very impressive defensive performance. Caruana against Bacrot was really wild. That also finally ended in a draw, but really that could have gone in any direction. And then there was the game between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, and Michael Adams, the English #1. And that's my game of the day. So we joined the game after 21 moves. Carlson has the white pieces and he has a pleasant space advantage. You can see here these pawns in the centre rather stifle black's pieces, in particular the bishops, this bishop on a7 and to some extent the bishop on d7. It's one of those tricky positions where as the defender you never really know when to remain passive or when to strike out, and I think, well, this was a very typical situation actually. So for example here Carlson is attacking this pawn on b7. Now it's possible to play bishop c8, and you could argue that, well, although black is passive, there are no real weaknesses in black's position. But, well, it's unpleasant to have to just sit there. But Adams had actually prepared a very nice counter thrust here, c5, and I really like this move. It's very clever. I mean, first of all, if the pawn is taken on c5, then it's clear that this bishop is suddenly back in the game and e3 is a target. It's no good. I mean, queen takes b7 is a critical move. Attacking the bishop, but there's a nice riposte. First of all, bishop h3. Now that uncovers an attack on the queen. Queen moves back and black exchanges. Now you could just take on d4 here, but maybe even better is queen a8. Suddenly you can see that black's pieces are liberated. Attacking d5 when white defends this. Black takes, well, probably e4 is white's best now. But let's just see what happens if pawn takes pawn. Then rook c8. You can see suddenly black's pieces are flooding out. This pawn is under fire. This pawn is under fire. Rook c2 is threatened. I mean, black's forces suddenly coordinate and white is all over the place. So it's a really clever idea. But interesting to see how Carlson dealt with this. He certainly didn't want to take that pawn. He captured the pawn on c5 en passant. Adams recaptured with the bishop. And now queen b3. What an excellent move. So this looks down at the pawn on f7, but perhaps more importantly, it takes control over the d5 square. Adams exchanged and then played queen d7. The move that Adams is desperate to play is d5, which would suddenly give the bishop a new diagonal. It would cement this pawn on e3. Black would be fine here, apart from this move, winning the exchange. So sadly for Adams, d5 simply isn't possible. He played queen d7. And now rook f1. Excellent move from Carlson. Now, of course, the f7 pawn is securely protected, but there is another point to this move. And it's to enable white to play rook f5. Now, why has he done this? Well, because finally d5 was threatened, but now, of course, that's impossible because white is guarding this square. And suddenly white takes control again. I really love this move, queen b3. You can see if black can't play d5, then this bishop is just biting on granite here, and it can't get out this way either. it's just a bad bishop. And this is what Carlson plays on. Let's see what happened. I should add that at this stage, Adams is running short of time. Bishop b8, well, you can see what a miserable piece this is. It's really going nowhere, hitting the pawn on d6. And Carlson just started probing with his pieces, just improving his position a little by little. Now, what Black would love to do to relieve the pressure is to exchange queens, but actually this doesn't help at all. Here, for example, and if Black keeps exchanging, then Black is just left with this rotten bishop and the rook swinging across the b5, perhaps the king joining in. It's not a good position for Black. Adams played rook c7 to protect the f7 pawn. Of course, there were 3 pieces attacking it. But look at that bishop. It's a terrible piece. And now Carlson started flashing his moves out and playing, well, relatively quickly. He had a bit of a think before he played bishop e1, but he's toying with Black here. Bishop e1 is a very nice idea. It's funny, when I check this position with software, it says that Black is still doing all right here. It recommends g6 and maybe king g7. But to me, this still looks highly unpleasant because White has control over d5 and this bishop is such a poor piece. But I think the point is here, it's actually very difficult for Black to form a coherent plan. Adams, short of time, was rather moving, well, without great purpose. Okay, he plays rook e4, which looks like a good move, but actually h3 simply shores up White's position on the king side. I really like this move g4 from Carlson. It makes room for the bishop possibly to come to g3, possibly to h4, but it gains space on the king side and starts to cramp these pawns. This is a classic kingside squeeze where White is just gaining territory little by little, and in the endgame this can be very important, as we'll see a little later on. So Adams is stuck for a plan. He's tripled on the e-file, but this is actually going nowhere. You can see that White solidly protects e3 and now there's nothing more to do. And short of time, Adams, I think, makes an inaccuracy. You can see he's just moving back and forth with these pieces. Rook b5, and this is a very unpleasant move for Black to meet. Threat, obviously, rook takes pawn, and if this is defended, then the pin is winning for White. Wins pawn, and what a pawn. So Adams tried bishop c7. Carlson took on b7. And here, Adams completely bottled it. He played queen a8. Should he have played bishop takes pawn? Short of time, this is such a difficult position to judge. White will play rook b8, bishop t8. It's possible that Black will simply lose this position by force. And when you're short of time, this is impossible to calculate. For example, White can swing this rook around, keeps control with queen d5, swings the rook around. This bishop can never move. Even when the king comes to g7, the bishop still can't move because there'll be fatal check on g8 and leading to mate. Can Black defend this position? I mean, he has no moves here. It's almost Zugzwang. It's hard to say whether White can actually crack Black open here, but I can understand why Adams didn't go in for this, because it could have been that he would lose by force straight away somehow. But queen a8, I'm afraid, was making life too easy for White. The rook simply came back, and now, of course, bishop takes pawn is impossible because of rook b8 check, winning the queen. So Carlson re-establishes control over d5 and queen d5. Bang! What powerful centralisation. And now I think black is utterly lost. White is a clear pawn up. And, well, this was, as they say, a matter of technique. But watch Carlson's technique. I mean, this is so impressive. First of all, I should say check simply doesn't get anywhere after rook f2. h4. Here's where white starts this squeeze again, and this is actually very important for finishing off the game. Black is just passive here. Rook e4 and g5. Excellent move. We'll see how important it is to gain territory. It just makes life so much easier for white when it comes to the final phase of the game. So the rook's job is done on d5. It can sometimes threaten to come to b7 and attack on the 7th rank, so rook a7. And now king f1. So there's a basic threat to move the king up to d3 and move over to the queen side and maybe advance with e4, perhaps free this rook to come over. So Adams tries to attack this pawn. Well, he does attack this pawn, but this really just leads to a simplification. So now, I mean, really, there's nothing better for black than to exchange. I mean, this pawn is going to fall. Rook b7 will happen soon. So Adams exchanged off into this rook and pawn endgame, but Carlson has appreciated long before that this is actually a very easy win. And it's an easy win because of this pawn on g5, which means that the pawn can never advance to f6, which means that white's king will eventually come to e5 and have an easy route into f6 to attack black's kingside. Let's see, and it's actually terribly simple. Rook f6, good move. So what, for the moment, white just keeps everything secure, and the king advances as far up the board as possible. And yeah, the rook comes back to f4 because Carlson wants to play d5 without allowing rook check and taking the pawn. He's going to advance as far as possible. So the plan is simply, well, we can see, as in the game, rook b3, king d4. So he just wants to play e4 and king e5. You can see black can never play f6 to get rid of that king on e5. And of course the king can't come here because the f pawn is on prise. So Carlson's moves, well, they can't be prevented at all. This was forced. I mean, it was very clever to put the rook on f4, making sure everything's protected. And now the rook's job is done, and it's time to activate it along the 7th rank. So it swings around. And now here, for example, if rook a3, I mean, actually it's even impossible to defend on the 7th rank. I mean, there's a simple winning idea, actually. And white just transposes into a king and pawn endgame. There you go. All the pawns drop. Adams attacked the pawn on h4, but this didn't help at all. It's very easy to win. So a straight attack. And now rook f8. And in this position, Adams actually resigned, which seems fair enough. For example, here, then rook check. Now there are two connected passed pawns, and well, this is terribly easy. And typically it's going to be mate very soon, or the pawn will go through. Such a classic performance from Carlson, so typical, getting a positional advantage and maintaining control. I think that's what he does so well, and finding little ways to improve his position and just making life extremely difficult for his opponent. Brilliant stuff. We've seen him do it before. So Carlson scored the only win so far in the tournament. After 2 rounds, he leads with 1.5 points.